Part 83. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 822. Remember 3Q Chinese website in 1 second, read wonderful novels for free without pop-ups. Princess Anyang and Tang Shui were in the pavilion, fighting and having no idea what they were talking about. Tang Ning used to think that Tang Yejing was a woman who had an eye for money, but she didn't expect that Princess Anyang was even worse than her. Tang Yao Yao loves money and likes the process of making money. She actually has no concept of money and never spends it randomly. What Princess Anyang likes is obviously the process of spending money. She treats guests to dinner and holds parties all day long, has friends all over the world, spends money from her hands, and can't make any splash. If we want to judge the most prodigal woman in the capital, she will definitely be able to outlast the others and come out on top. Of course, a prodigal family is not a failed Tang Ning's family. After all, they are just friends. When they leave the capital, it is not impossible to give her some shops and property. His and King Huai's proposal has been passed and will be implemented immediately. Tang Ning got to know the powerful people in Beijing who were doing this kind of grey business, and found that things were not as complicated as he thought. The Zhou family has the largest business and is the least trivial to deal with. The main reason is that he has the Queen Mother behind him, and because of her status, neither the officials in the court nor King Huai are willing to have trouble with the Zhou family. After all, no one wants to offend the most distinguished old man in Chen country. There is nothing to fear from other families. These families are all hovering at the bottom of the elite, and the origins of some families can even be traced back to the founding of the country when a large number of knights were granted. By now, their influence in the upper circles has been almost non-existent. In addition, there are some relatives who are only as good as the royal family, and the imperial doctor who was knighted for his service in treating the concubine more than 20 years ago. These are all small families that are about to decline. However, larger families do not bother to do such things that have their backs poked. There is no hope for these small families to revive, so they simply start amassing money endlessly, because this business is almost without capital. Buying and selling, so that they will not invest their money and energy in other business matters. As a result, after the court banned them from making money through this inhumane method, if they did not transform as soon as possible, they would have nothing to do but sit on their hands. However, when they get used to this way of making money that does not require much investment and can reap huge profits, it is not certain whether they can calm down and do other things. In the past 2 days, the Zhou family had a great time dancing with these powerful people, but the Tang family was unusually quiet. Although the Tang family was gone, Tang Ning still did not relax her surveillance on them. If you don't break out in silence, you will perish in silence. After seeing Kong Wang's example, Tang Ning didn't think silence was a good thing. At this time, the quieter it was, the more abnormal it was. Of course, it is unfounded to worry that the Tang family and King Duan will rebel like King Kong. A lesson learned from King Kong is that if Emperor Chen can still let King Duan launch another rebellion, then his throne will never be so stable for so many years. The next thing Tang Ning will supervise is the ban. After today, the capital will not allow people from the western regions to be traded as goods. Those slaves that have not yet been sold must be handed over in exchange for prisoners and hostages of the Chen kingdom in the western regions. Regarding the proposal of not allowing the grasslands to be used against Chen state to treat innocent people in the western regions, and banning the trade of slaves in the western regions, the imperial court officially wrote it into law. This is naturally not good news for those families who make a living in this field. But they cannot disobey the law, no matter how they act in secret, at least openly, they must appear to be obedient. Among them, the most tragic one is Yangping Hao. Other families still have some savings and can survive for a long time, but Marquis Yangping is completely destitute and owes a lot of debt. As an extremely marginalized powerful person, he cannot afford to offend any of his creditors. At Duke Zhao's mansion, Zhou Wu sent Marquis Yongping out, shaking his head and saying, "It's not that I won't help you, it's just that the amount is too huge. You know, the Zhou family is not having a good time now. This 1,000 taels is already what the Zhou family can take. The limit is out." Marquis Yongping had a mocking look on his face. 1,000 taels was just a drop in the bucket for the Zhou family. It was just because Zhou Wu didn't want to help him. He cupped his hands and said, "In that case, I'll take my leave first." Zhou Wu watched him walk away, a trace of disdain appeared on his old face, and he turned around and walked back. The door of Zhou mansion was closed, and Marquis Yongping turned around, grinned, and said, "Everyone on the left and right is going to die, why don't we all die together?" Because during the Chinese New Year, all ministries will temporarily close their offices, so each department will be busier than usual before the Chinese New Year. The Shangsha province was busier than the 6 departments and other yamen. The excerpts from each department were concentrated here. Tang Ning could no longer go home at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. He and King Huai had read all the excerpts. When they walked out of the palace, the sky was completely dark. Down. Normally, this would be the most lively time in the capital, but it had only been a few days since King Kang's rebellion, and the entire capital was still under martial law. At night, the people were reluctant to come out anymore. Tang Ning held a lantern in her hand and looked at the darkness ahead. She decided to ask Lao Zheng to pick him up at this time tomorrow. Although he and Prince Huai would be on the way, Prince Huai's mansion was closer and there was still a long way to go. He needed himself walk. It wasn't that he was worried about his own safety. Ever since Su Mei got the book of 10,000 poisons, Lao Zheng might not be able to gain favor with his current poisonous poison methods. If even these methods fail to work, even if Lao Zheng comes, it will be useless. King Huai walked side by side with him, and the two chatted without a word, mostly about the recent court affairs. At a certain moment, King Huai turned to look at him and asked casually, "Master Tang seems to have a high opinion of Zioan. If there is a chance, I would like to meet the leader of the Zioan kingdom." Tang Ning said, "His vision and structure are extremely advanced, at least 600 years ahead of the Chen kingdom. No one knows what will happen in the future." King Huai looked at him and wondered, why is Mr. Tang so sure? The world will be like this 600 years from now. Of course, Tang Ning couldn't say that he had calculated it based on time. The ideology of the people of Zioan was obviously not on the same level as that of Chen and Chu. Some of their concepts, thoughts, and values would only appear in modern times 600 years later. Of course, the premise is that the trajectory of historical development generally follows another world. He glanced at King Huai and said, "To be honest, I come from the future 600 years later." King Huai looked at him, shook his head, and stopped talking. Tang Ning didn't explain any more. When the truth is so false that others won't believe it, you can tell the truth casually. King Huai didn't speak, and Tang Ning didn't speak either, making the atmosphere a bit awkward. This embarrassment only lasted for a short time, and then disappeared again. Tang Ning and Wang Huai stopped at the same time and looked at the alleys that were engulfed in darkness on both sides. One after another figures came out of the deep alleys on both sides. They were wearing night clothes and their faces were covered with black cloth. The weapons in their hands shone coldly in the darkness. Tang Ning glanced at King Huai and asked, "Why don't you bring a guard?" King Huai asked back, "You didn't bring any with you either. This is the disadvantage of not traveling with an escort." Tang Ning looked at the man in black approaching them and said, "Your left, my right." King Huai nodded, "Okay." Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 823. Last night, an assassination took place in the capital. It was rare to assassinate someone in the street under the emperor's feet in the capital, not to mention that it happened shortly after King Kong rebelled and the capital was under full martial law. This was simply a disregard for the court and His Majesty. especially the targets of their assassination. One was the right prime minister of the current dynasty, and the other was a royal prince. These two people can be said to be the mainstays of the current court. The loss of any one of them would be a huge loss for the state of Chen. Because of his physical discomfort, His Majesty, who was not planning to attend the morning court today, was furious when he heard the news. He immediately summoned the Ministry of Justice and the Dali Temple to thoroughly investigate the case. No matter who was found, he would never tolerate it. The targets of the assassination were the right Prime Minister and King Huai, and Prince Duan was naturally the first suspect. However, it was not King Kong this time. There were more than 20 assassins last night. After the overnight interrogation by the Ministry of Justice, with all kinds of torture instruments, they had confessed the mastermind behind the scenes. These people were originally wanted criminals in the state of Chen, and they lived a life of fleeing and licking blood. A few years ago, Yang Pingho recruited them and sent them to the western regions to rob people and bring them to the capital to sell. Under the protection of Yang Pingho, these people got rid of their days of exile and could get huge rewards from it, so they stayed with Yang Pingho. The court banned their business this time, which meant that these people had to return to their previous precarious life, so Yang Pingho sent them to assassinate the right Prime Minister and King Huai. This matter was originally led by the right Prime Minister Tang Ning and King Huai. As long as they died, the big figures with relevant interests in the court would push forward, and the matter would naturally end here. After learning the mastermind behind the scenes from those people, the Ministry of Justice immediately led people to surround Yang Pingho's mansion. But in Yang Pingho's mansion, except for the maids and servants, Yang Pingho had long disappeared. The Ministry of Justice immediately issued a arrest warrant and sent it to various prefectures by express horse, vowing not to stop until Yang Pingho was found. His Majesty was also very angry about this matter. The assassins who assassinated the right Prime Minister and King Huai last night were dragged out by the imperial guards without waiting for the Ministry of Justice to pronounce the verdict, and all of them were beheaded without exception. At the same time, including the Zhou family, all families that had been involved with Yang Pingho were investigated by the Dali Temple. According to His Majesty's intention, once they were found to have colluded with Yang Pingho, none of them would be spared. Tang Mansion. Tang Ning got up in the morning, brushed his teeth, washed his face, and did a set of boxing in the yard. He took 2 buns and walked slowly towards the Shangshu province. Lao Zhang followed behind him, not leaving his side. After what happened yesterday, he felt that he had not fulfilled his responsibilities as a guard, and he became conscientious the next day. This also made Ziru and Xiaoi feel relieved. The assassination last night was beyond Tang Ning's expectations, and Yang Pingho's audacity was also beyond his expectations. However, judging from what he had investigated about the situation of Yongping Marquis, he did this for a reason. The court banned his business of human trafficking, and he had already received deposits from others and hired people. He lost both money and people in a flash, and he could not explain to those buyers. It seemed that he had to go all out to fight for a glimmer of hope. However, he chose the wrong person after all. Those people last night were not even a stretch for Tang Ning and King Huai. King Huai practiced martial arts, which Tang Ning had known for a long time, but in the battle last night, King Huai even finished the battle faster than him. Of course, this was because he did not use Gu. Even so, it also indirectly shows that if Tang Ning did not use those crooked ways and just fought hand to hand, he might not be King Huai's opponent. His strength had been greatly improved after going to the grassland, but he still had no confidence in defeating King Huai. After dealing with those assassins yesterday, he wanted to fight with King Huai, but unfortunately he was rejected. He entered the palace and walked into the Shangshu province, and many people surrounded him. "Lord Tang, are you okay? Did those assassins hurt you? They dared to assassinate the Prime Minister, they are so bold." Tang Ning waved his hand and said, "It's okay. The Golden Feather Guards who patrolled the city last night arrived in time and subdued those assassins. Thank goodness. If Lord Tang had any mishap, it would be a loss for my Chen state. His Royal Highness Prince Huai is here too. His Royal Highness, are you okay? The assassins assassinated the right Prime Minister and Prince Huai. Not only the officials of the Shangshu province, but also the officials of the whole court and the people in the capital were worried about them. If the right Prime Minister and Prince Huai were in trouble, I'm afraid the entire capital would be turned upside down. I don't know how much blood would be shed and how many people would die before it could be calmed down. Even if the two were safe and sound, His Majesty still chopped off the heads of the more than 20 assassins and ordered the Zhou family, Yushan Marquis, and other families to hand over all the slaves in the western regions. Before this, the court had planned to give them some compensation, but now there is not even a penny left. Zhou family. Zhou Wu looked anxious, pacing in the room, angrily saying, "Crazy, crazy, he must be crazy, he dared to assassinate King Huai and Tang Ning." Yu Shunho also regretted in his heart, saying, "We didn't help him, he would drag us to death together." The crime of assassinating the right Prime Minister and King Huai, if they were even a little bit related to them, even the Zhou family would be in big trouble, let alone these downtrodden dignitaries. Zhou Wu shook his head and said, "No, this business can't be done openly or secretly." Yu Shunho said, "The court wants us to hand over the people from the western regions. Give them if they want." Zhou Wu waved his hand. "The most important thing now is to sever their relationship with Yongping Ho. If the court classifies them as Yongping Ho's accomplices, they will have 100 mouths to clean up." Yu Shunho sighed and said, "It can only be like this." Zhou Wu's face was gloomy, and he gritted his teeth and said, "This bastard, if he dies, he will die by himself. Why drag us into it? It's better for him to die outside and never show up again." Yongping Ho did not die outside, nor did he escape. If the court wants to find someone, unless he leaves the state of Chen, it is impossible for him to escape. Although it is unknown where Yongping Ho fled to, on the morning of the second day after the assassination, 500 guards from each of the 4 gates of the capital rode out of the capital and searched along the major official roads and provincial roads. It only took 2 days for Yongping Ho to be found in a village near the capital. This case is the biggest case that has happened in the capital in recent years, except for the rebellion of King Kong. The 3 courts of the Ministry of Justice, the Dali Temple, and the Censorate held a joint trial. Yongping Ho was wearing shackles and kneeling in the hall, his face pale. The court cut off his business, causing him to offend those big figures in the capital, and he had no chance of survival. In this situation, he was desperate and assassinated Tang Ning and King Huai, which was also a dead end. After being caught by the guards, his fate was already doomed. He hated Tang Ning and King Huai, and hated them for letting him fall into such a situation. He also hated Zhou Wu and Yu Shunho. If they were willing to help him, how could he take such a risky move? The Minister of Justice sat on the top and slammed the gavel, saying, "You are so bold, Marquis Yongping, you dared to assassinate the right Prime Minister and King Huai, do you know your crime?" Marquis Yongping sat on the ground, sneered, and said, "They cut off my financial resources, so I will take their lives." Song Yi slammed the gavel again and asked, "Do you have any accomplices? Tell the truth." "Accomplices?" Marquis Yongping pulled the corner of his mouth and said, "Yes, of course, such a big thing, how can I do it alone?" You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 824. Marquis Yongping was arrested. Zhou Wu, Duke of Zhao, was not surprised to hear the news. He waved his hand and said, "This madman dared to assassinate the right Prime Minister and King Huai. He deserves it. Marquis Yongping's arrest is naturally a good thing for the Zhou family. He doesn't have to worry about being implicated by Marquis Yongping. What really worries him these 2 days is that Tang Ning and King Huai were assassinated. The court will not distinguish right from wrong and will catch the Zhou family and Marquis Yushun and others in one fell swoop. With the importance that His Majesty attaches to Tang Ning and King Huai, it is very likely to do such a thing. Now that Marquis Yongping has been arrested, the truth of the matter has been revealed, and the Zhou family can also be freed from suspicion. Zhou Wu breathed a sigh of relief. Just as he sat down and was about to drink a cup of tea, a servant of the Zhou family ran in and said in panic, "Master, it's not good. A group of imperial guards came outside and surrounded us." Snap! The teacup in Zhou Wu's hand fell to the ground and shattered. He stood up suddenly and asked, "What are the imperial guards doing here?" A general of the imperial guards came in and said, "Marquis Yongping has confessed. Please ask Duke Zhao to go back to the Ministry of Justice with us." Zhou Wu was stunned and asked, "Confess, what to confess?" The general of the imperial guards said, "Duke Zhao and Marquis Yushun and Marquis Yongping have been exposed for plotting to murder the right Prime Minister and King Huai. If you have anything to say, you can talk about it in the Ministry of Justice." Plot to murder the right Prime Minister and King Huai. Zhou Wu heard this, and his eyes went dark. He felt dizzy and said angrily, "Marquis Yongping, you are not a human being." At the same time, in the Marquis Yushun's mansion, Marquis Yushun looked at the imperial guards outside the door and shouted, "This is slander, this is pure slander." Marquis Yongping hid for 2 days, but was still caught. He could not escape the death penalty for assassinating the Prime Minister and the Prince. Before he died, he also confessed all his accomplices, including the Duke of Zhao, the Marquis of Yushun and others. These people were related to the interests of the new policy of the state of Chen towards the western regions and had a strong motive for committing the crime. After the Marquis of Yongping confessed, the Ministry of Justice asked His Majesty and immediately arrested the Duke of Zhao, the Marquis of Yushun and others. However, these people refused to admit that they were the accomplices of the Marquis of Yongping and were temporarily detained in the prison of the Ministry of Justice. In the imperial study, Emperor Chen looked at Tang Ning and King Huai below and asked, "Are you two okay?" King Huai bowed and said, "My son is fine." Tang Ning raised his hand and said, "I am fine too." "If you are fine, go to the Shangsha province to get busy." Emperor Chen waved his hand and said, "Remember to bring more guards when you go out in the future, and be careful." Tang Ning and King Huai walked out of the imperial study, and a palace maid walked in from outside. When passing by her, Tang Ning paused slightly, sniffed, and then looked back. King Huai looked at him and said, "If Lord Tang likes this maid, tell your father, and he may give her to you." Tang Ning realized that his previous action seemed a bit obscene. Just at that moment, he smelled a smell from the maid. Although the smell was very faint, Tang Ning could be sure that it was the smell of some kind of incense. In order to practice his sense of smell, he smelled countless incense, but he had never smelled this kind of incense. He waved his hand casually and said, "I don't know what kind of fragrance she used, it smells pretty good." King Huai smiled and said, "The Shangsha province has 2 tasks, one is to investigate the western region's people who were captured in the capital, and the other is to interrogate the Duke of Zhao and others. Which one will Lord Tang choose?" Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "I'll choose the former." When the court formulated this rule, some envoys from small western regions countries in the capital also came out one after another. In addition to praising the court of Chen, they also asked the court to release the slaves who had been captured. No buying and selling, no killing. There are still many western regions people in the capital, living in the homes of the major dignitaries as slaves and maids. If it were in the past, the court would naturally not spend so much effort to do this thankless task. But this time is different. If they plan to cooperate with these small western regions countries, they cannot ignore their demands. Emperor Chen will allocate silver from the inner court to redeem the western region slaves in the homes of those dignitaries. Of course, the premise is that they are willing. This matter is relatively simple, because it is done by the lower level officials, and there will be no resistance. Interrogating the Duke of Zhao is different, and it is not certain that any results will be obtained. Tang Ning decisively chose the easy task. King Huai had no objection to this, and nodded, then leave the interrogation to me. Ministry of Justice Prison. Duke Zhou Wu of Zhao grabbed the bars of the cell, looked across, and angrily said, I have no grudges against you, why are you doing this? Marquis Yongping showed a trace of sarcasm on his face and said, you are unwilling to help me with just 100,000 taels. Are you satisfied now? Duke Zhao gritted his teeth and said, just because of this. With these 100,000 taels, I would not be forced to this desperate road. Marquis Yongping looked at him and said, when you lent me 1,000 taels of silver, I said that you would regret it. Duke Zhao was furious and said, so you framed us. I said that we are grasshoppers on the same boat. If I die, you can't live either. We will go to the underworld together. Marquis Yongping pulled the corner of his mouth and said, either side is death, why don't I find a few more companions for myself? Duke Zhao said, we didn't murder the right Prime Minister and King Huai. Marquis Yongping sneered and said, who knows? Duke Zhao held the bars of the cell and shouted, did you hear it? Did you hear it? He is a false accusation. He is a false accusation. Come and listen. 2 jailers from the Ministry of Justice came over, opened the cell door, and said, please come with us, Duke Zhao. Zhou Wu's face changed, and he said vigilantly, what are you doing? Do you want to lynch me? I tell you, I am the Queen Mother's brother. If you dare to do anything to me, you are finished, and the entire Ministry of Justice is finished. The yelling Zhou Wu was taken to a quiet cell. Looking at the figure in the cell, Zhou Wu was stunned and immediately said, Your Highness Huai Wang, I am innocent, I am innocent. How could I let someone assassinate your Highness? King Huai smiled and said, don't be afraid, Duke Zhao. I won't make random assumptions or wrongly accuse you without evidence. Duke Zhao was relieved and said, that's good, that's good. King Huai looked at him and asked, did Duke Zhao have any grudges with Marquis Yongping? Zhou Wu nodded and said, yes, he asked me to borrow 100,000 taels of silver, but I didn't lend it to him, so he held a grudge and wanted to die, and even dragged us with him. Your Highness, please understand. I know. King Huai nodded, asked him a few more questions, and asked the Yamen runners of the Ministry of Justice to take him back. A moment later, Marquis Yushun was brought up. Duke Zhao had already informed him after returning just now, so Marquis Yushun was not panicked. He walked into the cell, bowed respectfully, and said, meet His Royal Highness Prince Huai. Prince Huai looked at him and said, it's been many years since we last met. Marquis Yushun looks much more haggard than before. Marquis Yushun laughed dryly and said, Your Highness is becoming more and more heroic. We are already old. Prince Huai breathed a sigh of relief and said, when I first met Marquis Yushun, you were still the imperial physician in the palace. So many years have passed in the blink of an eye, and you have been a marquis for so many years. Marquis Yushun said, it's all because of your Majesty's favor. No. Prince Huai shook his head and said, this title was earned by your medical skills. When the Crown Prince, concubine Yang, and the Queen were seriously ill, you were the one who treated them. My father really trusts you. Hearing this, Marquis Yushun's body trembled and his pupils shrank suddenly. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 825. Chapter 820 of the main volume of Ruyi Xiaolang Jun commits suicide updated on 21/23. Ho Chiang of Yushun cheered up and said, that happened many years ago, I have forgotten it. You can't forget. King Huai glanced at him and said, you will never forget these things in your life, and you don't dare to forget. The Marquis of Yushan said, Your Highness, I can protect your family from death. King Huai looked at him calmly and said, you only have this chance. Another cell. Zhao Qiuagong looked at Marquis Yongping opposite him and sneered, do you know who is in charge of this case? It's not Tangning, but His Highness Prince Huai. You still want to drag me to die with you? Zhao Qiuagong spat secretly and said, I tell you, I am the uncle of King Huai. Do you think he will fall into your trap? Conspiring to kill the Prime Minister, assassinating the Prince, blaming the Emperor's relatives, cutting off your head is an advantage to you, you should be executed by Lingqi. No matter how loudly Duke Zhao shouted to eat, Marquis Yongping remained sullen and silent. After a while, Marquis Yushan walked back slowly, his expression a little dazed, as if someone had taken away his soul. Duke Zhao looked at him and said in surprise, what's wrong with you? Marquis Yushan shook his head and said, no, it's nothing. Zhao Qiuagong scratched his back and said, weren't you an imperial doctor before? My back hurts a little. Please help me find out what's wrong. The Marquis of Yushan leaned against the wall, closed his eyes, and said, I haven't seen anyone in more than 20 years, and I have forgotten my medical skills. After I go out, Zhao Qiuagong can see a doctor himself. Stingy Zhao Qiuagong glanced at him, lay down on the wooden bed, pulled the quilt, and fell asleep peacefully. As time passed, the cell gradually became dark. Duke Zhao was lying on the bed, snoring everywhere. Somewhere in the corner, leaning against the wall, the Marquis of Yushan, who had been silent for more than an hour, suddenly opened his eyes. Within the sky prison, there were two more dim lights. Marquis Yushan stretched one hand into his arms and fumbled for a long time before he found a porcelain bottle. He opened the cork and poured out a pill from the bottle. He held the pill in his hand, leaned against the wall, and sat there for a long time. After an unknown amount of time, he slowly raised his head and stuffed the pill into his mouth. There was only a sigh in the cell. After receiving King Huai's assurance, Zhao Qiuagong finally felt relieved and had a sweet dream all night. When he opened his eyes, it was already bright. He looked at the Marquis of Yushan sitting in the corner and asked in surprise, you didn't sleep last night? Marquis Yushan leaned against the wall and did not answer. Duke Zhao walked over, pushed him and said, hey, wake up. Plop. Marquis Yushan fell to the ground, a line of blood spreading from the corner of his mouth. As if he thought of something, Duke Zhao slowly knelt down, stretched out his index finger, and probed between his nose. The next moment, his expression changed wildly, he took 2 steps back suddenly, and said loudly, here comes someone, he's dead. In the cell opposite, Marquis Yongping watched all this with a look of shock on his face. The Marquis of Yushan died. He committed suicide by taking poison in the prison of the Ministry of Punishment. When he was found the next day, he was already a corpse. The autopsy report of Wu Zhou also came out soon. He committed suicide by taking poison. He took a strong poison. After taking it, he would die in less than a cup of tea. He used to be an imperial physician, and because of his great achievements, he was granted a title by Emperor Chen as an exception. It was not unusual for him to have such a method. After ruling out the possibility of Yu Shunho committing suicide, Yu Shunho's death was determined to be suicide due to fear of crime. As for Wei's crime, it is obvious that he also intervened in Yongping Hao's assassination of the right Prime Minister and King Huai. In this way, several powerful families, including the Zhou family, cannot escape suspicion. In anger, His Majesty expelled everyone, including Duke Zhao, from their titles, and their property was searched. Marquis Yongping and Marquis Yushan were designated as the main culprits, and their crimes were increased to 1 level. Marquis Yongping was sentenced to death, and Marquis Yushan was dead. His family members could not escape the law and were executed. However, King Huai interceded for Yu Shunho's family at court. Yu Shunho died unjustly, but the disaster did not affect his family. His parents, wife, and children were innocent. In this case, King Huai and Tang Ning were the victims. He and Tang Ning begged for mercy at the same time, and His Majesty did not insist, so he agreed to let them go and let the Marquis of Yushun's family go. When King Huai walked out of the main hall and walked towards Shangsha province, he cupped his hands to Tang Ning and said, "Thank you, Lord Tang, for what happened just now." "It's nothing." Tang Ning waved her hand and said, "The Marquis of Yushun is guilty, and the harm to his family was not brought to bear in the first place." After saying this, he looked suspicious and asked, "Did the Marquis of Yushun really commit suicide out of fear of crime?" "The investigation result of the Ministry of Punishment is this," King Huai said. "As for whether it is true or not, only the deceased Marquis of Yushun knows." Marquis Yushun's suicide was somewhat beyond Tang Ning's expectations. If he was like Zhao Qiuagong and refused to admit it and persisted, the most serious result would be to cut off his title and confiscate his family. This would at least save his life. Unexpectedly, he would choose this desperate path. King Huai looked at him and said, "Master Tang, please go back to the Yamen first. I will urge them to search your house." Tang Ning waved her hand and said, "Let's go." In the imperial study room. Having just dealt with several major families, including his mother's family, Chen Huang was obviously not in a good mood. He had been reading a letter in his hand for a quarter of an hour. After a while, he put down the memorial and said, "Marquis Yushun is dead." Wei Jian sighed and said, "I didn't expect him to be so bold as to assassinate King Huai and Lord Tang." Emperor Chen said, "It's not a bad thing that he's dead. For him, Marquis Yushun should have died more than 20 years ago. The reason why he kept him was actually fishing. He wanted to use Marquis Yushun as bait. Anyone who tried to uncover the fog more than 20 years ago through him had already gone to where they should go. Now that Marquis Yushun is dead, those things that should have been sealed in history will be sealed forever." In the Marquis Yushun's mansion, the clerk of the Ministry of Works was moving things out from inside. In the Marquis Yushun's mansion, both the master and the servant stood timidly in the yard, not daring to breathe. "Why do you do that?" A young man stood in the crowd, excitedly wanting to rush out, but was tightly grabbed by a woman. The young man turned around and asked, "Mom, why are you stopping me?" "Pa." The woman slapped him hard on the face and said angrily, "Do you want to go downstairs to accompany your father?" The young man was stunned and covered his face, unable to speak. A figure came over and asked, "Are you the family of Yushun Marquis?" The woman looked at him and asked, "You are?" A clerk from the Ministry of Revenue ran forward and bowed hurriedly, saying, "Greetings to His Royal Highness Prince Huai." Hearing Prince Huai's name, the woman was stunned for a moment, and immediately pulled the young man to kneel down, kowtowed several times, and said gratefully, "Thank you, Your Highness, for sparing the lives of my Bai family." Prince Huai personally bent down to help the woman up, patted the young man on the shoulder, and said, "Leave the capital, find a place to open a clinic, and be filial to your mother in the future." The young man lowered his head and said, I can't treat illnesses, I can't open a clinic." Prince Huai looked at him and asked, "The Bai family has been practicing medicine for generations, why can't you treat illnesses?" The young man said, "My father set a rule more than 20 years ago that the descendants of the Bai family would not learn medical skills or take the imperial examinations. If anyone violated the rule, his legs would be broken and he would be expelled from the family." Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 826. At the end of the third year of Dingyuan, the capital was not peaceful. The prince rebelled, the prime minister was assassinated. These things had not happened in the capital for decades. In the past 2 years, the national strength of Chen state has been growing day by day, the south of the Yangtze River has been pacified, the grasslands have been settled, and the unstable factors at home and abroad have gradually become stable. Even His Majesty has to offer sacrifices to the heaven to show his merits, which shows that Chen state is thriving and prosperous. However, the things that happened one after another were like slaps in his face one after another. In these days, many people died in the capital. The largest vegetable market in the city was always filled with a faint bloody atmosphere that could not be washed away. When the people looked up at the sky, they even felt that there were countless dead souls floating in the sky of the capital. However, the people were forgetful. The end of the year was approaching, which was a major event for everyone, especially after the time entered the 12th lunar month. The whole capital began to revive and boil. In the past half-month, the Ministry of Households has counted all the western region's population in the capital. No matter they are slaves or maids in wealthy families or concubines in powerful families, as long as they are willing, they can regain their freedom and be escorted by the court to return to the western regions. This matter was carried out under the pressure of many small countries in the western regions. The powerful and wealthy businessmen in the capital were very cooperative and rarely voiced opposition. There were voices of opposition at the beginning, but later those families were raided by the imperial guards, and no one objected. Your Majesty has been very murderous recently, especially after King Kong rebelled and the right encounter was assassinated. This is something that everyone has seen. In the past 2 years, nearly 30% of the powerful families in the capital have been reduced. The remaining families have also sensed the danger and behaved with their tails between their legs, not daring to disobey. Of course, some people from the western regions, mostly women from the western regions, have a very comfortable life in the capital. They are not willing to change their current lives and are willing to stay in the capital, and the court has not forced them. During this period, Emperor Chen's attendance at court was significantly less, and the number of memorials sent to the Ministry of Shangshu every day was also reduced again and again. This increased the difficulty of the Ministry of Shangshu's work. Tang Ning spent every day in a busy schedule. After the new year, there was only less than half a year left before the 3-year period. It was at this time that Tang Ning received a letter from Li Tianlan. The content of the letter surprised him. Xiao Xiao and the old beggar actually came to Chu State and met her. They now live in the former Prince Xian's mansion, which is now the Princess Mansion. It was not until now that Tang Ning understood why the old beggar and Xiao Xiao had no news for so long. She wrote this letter to invite Xiru and Xiaoi to visit Chu State. Although the letter did not say it, Tang Ning knew very well that she was reminding him that their 3-year period was about to end. Letting Xiru and Xiaoi go to Chu State now is undoubtedly the most appropriate choice, because Tang Ning will also leave Chen State in half a year at least and a year at most. What he had to do now was to wait for Su Mei to come back, and then take them and Zhao Man away together. For him, there were 2 places that were absolutely safe. The first was the grassland, and the second was Chu. He had already begun to make arrangements in the grassland, where Xiao Mania was, so he could put aside all his worries. Although Li Tianlan could not cover the sky with one hand in Chu, as the eldest princess, Xiao Ru and Xiao Yi would not be bullied if they went there. Perhaps they could stay in Chu for a while, and then go to the grassland together. After all, the matter of the father-in-law in Chu had not been resolved, and he would definitely go to Chu in the future. Tang Ning had almost finalized the plan, but he did not expect to be opposed by Xiao Ru and Xiao Yi. Wherever my husband is, I will be there. Zhong Yi looked at him and said, if we want to go, we will go together, and if we want to stay, we will stay together. Although Su Ru did not speak, she took Zhong Yi's hand, indicating that she would stand on Zhong Yi's side. Well, they disagreed, and Tang Ning could only compromise temporarily. Anyway, it's still early now, and it won't be too late to talk about it after the new year. However, this letter from Chu still reminded him deeply that the day they left was not far away. Tang Ning had already begun to let Tang Yaoyao handle the business in the capital. The capital is different from other places. Doing business here requires a very large background, otherwise it will be difficult to move forward. In order to prevent the business in the capital from getting into trouble after they leave, Tang Ning simply asked her to gradually withdraw the business in the capital to other states. Although this will lose some profits, it also avoids possible troubles in the future. After dinner, Tang Ning came to Xiru's room and saw that she was alone in the room, and slowly closed the door. Xiru heard the voice, looked back, blushed, and said, "Brother Xiaoning, it's still daytime. What are you thinking about?" Tang Ning came over, tapped her forehead, and said, "I'm here to talk to you about something serious." Xiru looked at him and said, "I can't persuade my sister." Tang Ning was surprised and said, "How do you know I'm going to say this?" Xiru said, "I'll see what brother Xiaoning is thinking." It seems that it is impossible to develop Xiru into a trader. This matter can only be considered in the long run. Tang Ning looked at her, smiled, and said, "Then guess what I want to do now?" Xiru looked up at him and her face immediately blushed. Mr. Lao Shi once said that a girl's blushing is better than a long dialogue. The premise of this sentence is that girls don't wear makeup. If they put a thick layer of powder on their faces and then apply a layer of rouge, who knows if they blush or not? The pursuit of rouge by women in the capital is no different from that of women who love cosmetics in later generations. The Tang family has several rouge shops in the capital, and the business is very hot. The rouge produced by Tang Grenzai has always been in short supply. However, even if this business is very profitable, Tang Ning still wants to sell these shops to prepare for leaving the capital in the future. 4 of the 5 rouge shops have been sold, and there is still one left, and the other party can't eat it. Tang Ning sat in the back hall, drank a cup of tea, and when he was about to leave, he heard a familiar voice coming from the front. "How much is this box of rouge?" Tang Ning stood up and walked out, and saw Princess Anyang talking to the shopping guide girl in the rouge shop. Tang Ning greeted her and said, "What a coincidence, Princess." Princess Anyang looked at him and asked, "You are a grown man, why are you here in the rouge shop?" Tang Ning glanced at her and said, "This rouge shop is originally ours, why can't I come?" Princess Anyang looked up and saw the plaque of Tang Grenzai, then said, "I almost forgot that half of the shops on this street belong to you. Pack this for me first," she said to the little girl, then looked behind her. The maid said, "Pinner, pay." Tang Ning waved his hand and said, "No need, I'll take the princess." "In that case." Princess Anyang looked at him and said, "Then I have to pick a few more boxes." Tang Ning looked at her and said, "I just said this shop, the princess can pick as many boxes as she wants." Tang Ning is a person who repays a drop of water as a spring. Princess Anyang helped him twice. Tang Ning remembered this favor. The 10,000 taels of silver and this shop are his repayment to her. Princess Anyang was stunned for a moment, and then looked at him and asked, "Do you have anything to ask me?" Tang Ning shook his head and said, "No." Princess Anyang thought about it, as if she realized something, took 2 steps back, looked at him and said, "You are not my type, we can't." You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 827. Forget it. Tang Ning waved his hand and turned to walk outside. The shop was not sold out. Tang Ning just said later that if she wanted it, he would give it to her, and if she didn't want it, forget it. Wait a minute. Princess Anyang hurriedly stopped him and asked uncertainly, "Are you really giving it to me?" Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "Do you want it or not?" Princess Anyang nodded and said, "Yes, why not?" Tang Ning looked at the shopkeeper and said, "Give the shop deed to the princess." After a while, Princess Anyang held the shop deed of the rouge shop in her hand, and still felt a little unreal. She looked at the maid beside her and said, "Pinner, pinch me." The maid immediately lowered her head, shook her head, and said, "I dare not." Princess Anyang pinched herself, and a red mark immediately appeared on her arm. She finally confirmed something and said, "It seems that I am not dreaming, but he is crazy." She just went out to buy a box of rouge, but someone gave her a whole rouge shop. Princess Anyang put away the shop deed and wondered, why did he give me such a big gift? The maid named Pinner thought for a while and said, maybe he really likes the princess. How could someone just give someone a shop? Princess Anyang wondered, but why is it a rouge shop? Pinner thought for a moment and said, maybe he means that the princess is as beautiful as rouge. Princess Anyang said, you mean, he likes me? Pinner scratched her head and said, if it wasn't for this, why did he give the princess such a valuable thing? Princess Anyang waved her hands and said, but what does he like about me? He has so many wives at home, I can't compare to them. Pinner looked at her and said, even if the princess can't compare to them in other aspects, there is one thing that none of them can compare to the princess. Pinner said proudly, they are not as easy to give birth as the princess. So many wives don't have children. If it were the princess, she might have already. Princess Anyang said angrily, shut up. Tang Ning sent Princess Anyang to the rouge shop just because he met her there. If the place where the two met was a bookstore, he would send her to the bookstore. If the place where the two met was a restaurant, he would send her to the restaurant. That's all. The Tang family's shops in the capital should be sold out first, but they can't be too ostentatious and attract attention. The next batch will be sold in a few months. In fact, Tang Ning had no idea that he would leave soon. Although Emperor Chen acquiesced to his relationship with Zhao Man, the premise of all this was that he was still in Chen state and served Emperor Chen. Once he wanted to take Zhao Man away from Chen state, and they were entangled to the end of the world, Emperor Chen would definitely break up the couple again. That's why he wanted Xiru and Xiaoi to leave in advance, and it would be best if they took their father-in-law and mother-in-law with them, so that he would have no worries. It's a pity that this matter has not taken the first step so far, and it can only be considered in the long run. When Tang Ning returned home, he saw Tang Shui was there too. Under the request of many small countries in the western regions, the court finally compromised and rescued the people in the western regions who were trafficked to the capital by those people. People from other small countries would be sent to their respective countries, and the people of Xiaoan would be used to exchange for the captives captured by Xiaoan in Chen state. In this way, Tang Shui's wish was also fulfilled. Tang Ning walked into the courtyard, looked at her, and asked, when are you going to leave? Tang Shui said, 3 days later. Tang Ning was surprised and said, so soon, won't you wait until the end of the Chinese New Year? Tang Shui said, 1 month earlier or later, it doesn't make any difference. She had been separated from her parents for so many years, and now she didn't even know whether they were alive or dead. Tang Ning could understand her eagerness to go to the western regions. However, a quarter of an hour later, he stood in the courtyard, looked at Tang Yu in surprise, and asked, are you going to the western regions too? Tang Yu nodded and said, it's boring to stay at home. I want to go out with Shui. Although Xiru, Xiaoi, and Tang Yaoyao were all very filial, there was a fact that Tang Shui was raised by her since she was a child. She had always regarded Tang Shui as her daughter and daughter-in-law. This feeling lasted for more than 20 years, and no one could replace it, not even Tang Ning. The western regions were very chaotic. If it wasn't necessary, Tang Ning didn't even want Tang Shui to go. But he knew very well that both of them had reasons to go. Tang Ning never made decisions for them. He thought about it and nodded, saying, I will arrange for someone to protect you along the way. After learning about this, Tang Shui looked at him in surprise and asked, are you crazy? How can you let my aunt go with me? Tang Ning looked at her and asked, how about you go and persuade mother? Tang Shui glanced at him and said, if she was so easy to persuade, where would you be now? Tang Ning sighed and said helplessly, I'll leave mother to you along the way. Tang Shui said, you don't need to tell me about this. Tang Ning said, I will select 2,000 beggars sect disciples, disguise them as a caravan, and go with you. Some small countries in the western regions have only hundreds or thousands of people. 2,000 beggars sect disciples can already destroy a small or medium-sized country. With firearms, as long as they don't go to war with Xiaowan head-on, there won't be any major mistakes. Besides, Tang Shui went to Xiaowan to look for relatives, not to fight, so these firearms were not needed at all. When they set out from the capital, there were only 500 people accompanying them. When they passed through various prefectures along the way, they transferred some people from the branch rudders. In the past few years, Lu Laoer and others have been implementing the teachings of the beggars gang. In every prefecture of the Chen Kingdom, there are beggars wherever there are people. Today, the beggars gang has become the world's largest gang. 3 days later, Tang Ning stood outside the city gate, looked at Tang Shui, and said, take good care of mother. Tang Shui rode on the horse, waved to him, and said, we are leaving. Princess Anyang stood beside Tang Ning, waved to her, watched the group go away, turned to look at Tang Ning, and asked, are you really giving me that shop? You won't take it back? Tang Ning asked, do I look like someone who goes back on his word? Princess Anyang continued to ask, but why did you give it to me? Tang Ning looked at her and asked, do you know why Lao Tzu wrote the Tao Te I Ching? Princess Anyang glanced at him and said, because I want to. Is it your business? Women are really troublesome animals. Tang Ning regretted his unnecessary actions that day. Since she insisted on a reason, Tang Ning would just give her one. He looked at Princess Anyang and said, to be honest, I actually have something to ask of you. If you are too nice to me, you are either a traitor or a thief. I know you must have something to ask of me. Princess Anyang looked like she knew everything and said, tell me what it is. Tang Ning thought for a moment and said, I want you. Don't even think about it. Princess Anyang looked at him, her face blushing, and angrily said, who do you think I am, Anyang? I want you to tell Xiao Man a message for me. She hasn't left the palace for several days. Tang Ning looked at Princess Anyang, whose face was flushed, and asked, why, is this embarrassing for you, Princess? Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 828. Zhao Man now spends most of her time in the palace with the Queen Mother. It is not difficult for Tang Ning to enter the palace, but it is difficult to enter the harem. Men have always been stingy, especially to their wives. The emperor is even more so. The concubines in the harem can only be his. Other men are not allowed to take a look at them. Therefore, there are only maids and eunuchs in the palace. Unless there is a special reason, the harem has always been a forbidden area for these foreign ministers. Princess Anyang is a woman and is not on the list of forbidden areas. Princess Anyang came to her senses and realized that she had just thought wrong. She hesitated and said, bring a message. What message? When you go to see the Queen Mother, tell her to leave the palace and return home in the next 2 days. Tang Ning looked at Princess Anyang and asked, what did the princess think of just now? Ever since Tang Ning gave her a valuable shop for no reason, Princess Anyang believed that he had some thoughts about her. What else can a man think of a woman? It's nothing but those things that are too embarrassing to talk about. When he thinks about the fact that he has so many wives but still has no children, and she looks like she is easy to give birth to. She and Pinner discussed it in depth and felt that Tang Ning wanted to get her and let her help him give birth to a son. This unreasonable request was of course rejected by Princess Anyang, but she didn't expect that Tang Ning just asked her to pass on a message. Nothing, her face turned red because of shame, and she said, I will help you pass on this message. Tang Ning noticed her strangeness, but didn't ask any more. Women are like this, they have rich imaginations, and often through some small things, they can imagine a big drama with dozens of folds in their minds. This is even more true for Princess Anyang. Tang Ning suspected that she could even think of him wanting to seduce her from the fact that he gave her a shop, and then think of him wanting her to help him give birth to a son. In fact, he just missed Zhao Man a little after not seeing her for many days, and wanted to ask her to pass on a message, that's all. In the princess's mansion, Princess Anyang looked at Pinner and said, it seems that we have misunderstood. He doesn't like me at all. After that, she showed anger on her face again, and said indignantly, isn't this princess inferior to his wife? Why doesn't he like me? Princess Anyang was straightforward. Tang Ning asked her to pass on a message the day before, and Zhao Man came back the next day. The rebellion of King Kong did have an impact on Zhao Man. Her brother wanted to kill her father and other brothers, and she felt bad. But now she has learned to hide those emotions in her heart, leaving only a strong appearance. Zhao Man snuggled in his arms and asked, are we leaving next year? Tang Ning nodded and said, at least half a year, at most a year, I will take you here. Zhao Man didn't speak for a long time. Tang Ning looked down at Zhao Man and asked, are you reluctant to leave? I am a little reluctant to leave the royal grandmother. Zhao Man nodded and said, but the royal grandmother also said that when a girl grows up, she should think about herself. If she is afraid of this and that, and is reluctant to leave this and that, she will never be happy. Tang Ning was very fortunate that there was such a person in the cold palace who could warm her and provide her with a safe haven forever. In comparison, Su Mei's childhood seemed to be cold and without warmth. She had been away for more than half a year, and after the Lantern Festival, it would be almost a year. Tang Ning didn't expect that the matter in Kandy would be delayed for so long. In recent months, she didn't even send a letter back. This made Tang Ning feel a little uneasy. Emperor Chen sent spies to Guizhou twice in a row, but there was no news. Even the court was now unclear about what happened there. After the new year, if there was still no news there, Tang Ning planned to go there in person. In the last few days of the third year of Dingyuan, Tang Ning did not wait for Su Mei to come back, but waited for Xiao Xiao to come back. The old beggar took her out to travel this time, and it took more than half a year. When he saw her again, she was taller and more beautiful. She was a beautiful young girl, completely different from the malnourished little beggar back then. In the past few years, Fang Xinyu's personality was not as closed as before, and she was willing to open her heart to some people besides Tang Ning. After hearing the news that Xiao Xiao was back, Fang Xinyu came to the Tang family last night. The two slept in the same bed. Until the next day, Xiao Xiao was still telling her about her travels. The old beggar patted old Zheng on the shoulder and said, I haven't seen you for a few months. You've improved your skills. Old Zheng glanced at him and continued to sharpen his knife. It was not known whether it was Tang Ning's illusion, but after the old beggar came back, old Zheng's movements of sharpening the knife were much faster than before. Although the two of them often mocked each other and attacked each other's weaknesses, they still cared about each other. Tang Ning heard Xiao Xiao say that they met an old woman selling noodles in Chu State, who could fight the old beggar to a draw. In Tang Ning's eyes, the old beggar was the pinnacle that all warriors looked up to. She did not expect that the old woman selling noodles she met that year was actually a hidden master. According to Xiao Xiao, in the past 6 months, she followed the old beggar and didn't know how many gates she had kicked and how many opponents she had defeated. A year ago, Tang Ning was no match for her, and now she didn't know how much she had grown. Of course, Tang Ning now would not be so stupid as to compete with her. It is important for people to know themselves. Even Tang Yejin would not do things, so he certainly would not ask for trouble. At the end of the year, there were many memorials to be processed by the Shangshu province, and Wang Xiang was ill. Tang Ning did not know how many memorials he had to read every day. He had to wait until dark before he dragged his tired body and returned home dizzy. After half a month of such a life, he roughly understood why Wang Xiang liked to be sick so much. If he did not take a leave every few days and hand over those tedious memorials to other officials in the Shangshu province, he would not live to this age. This further strengthened Tang Ning's determination to leave the state of Chen as soon as possible. Being a prime minister sounds good, with a high position and power, second only to one person, above 10,000 people, and managing all the officials in the court, but if it goes on like this for a lifetime, what is the meaning of life? Freedom is far more important to him than these false names. Not only did he have to review memorials in the Shangshu province, but he was also summoned by the state of Chen every 2 days to hold a small court meeting to discuss issues that were not resolved in the morning court. In the imperial study, Emperor Chen sat at the top and said, "The matter of the western regions has been settled. King Huai should arrange guards as soon as possible to escort the people of the western regions back." King Huai cupped his hands and said, "Your son obeys your order." Today's small court meeting was to discuss the alliance with many small countries in the western regions. Tang Ning thought that today was over here, but he didn't expect that just as Emperor Chen asked them to go back, a young eunuch ran in from outside the hall and handed him a secret letter. Emperor Chen opened the secret letter and his face completely sank after reading it. Wang Xiang raised his head, looked at Emperor Chen, and asked, "Your Majesty, has anything big happened?" Emperor Chen put the letter down and said in a deep voice, "This is already the third batch of spies who disappeared in Guizhou. Fortunate young gentleman." Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 829. Qiandi was once the territory of Liang State. Since the disintegration of Liang State, Qiandi has been in a state of chaos. Chen State was happy to see the chaos in Qiandi. After all, as a neighbor, Chen State did not want anyone to reunify Qiandi, because it might bring trouble to them. After all, Qiandi was too close to Jiangnan, and because of its unique geographical advantages, it could attack and retreat. If they had any intentions towards Jiangnan, many people in Chen State would not be able to sleep at night. Therefore, over the years, Emperor Chen has deployed a large number of secret agents in Qiandi, monitoring their every move all the time. More than half a year ago, they discovered the unusual movements in Qiandi. At the same time, the secret agents deployed by Chen State in Qiandi also lost contact. Without secret agents, the court lost its eyes to monitor Qiandi. During this period, Emperor Chen sent secret agents to Qiandi 3 times, but these secret agents entered Qiandi and no news came back. It is easy to know that something must have happened in Qiandi, something that Emperor Chen did not want to happen. It was about the safety of Jiangnan, so he had no choice but to pay attention to it. Emperor Chen didn't know what happened in Qiandi, but Tang Ning knew it very well. For decades, the Wangu sect had no saint. This time, they were determined to select a saint no matter what. This was about the affiliation of the Wangu sect and the situation in Qiandi. It would be strange if the whole Qiandi didn't boil over. After hearing what Emperor Chen said, Wang Xiang's face became solemn and he said, "Your Majesty, although Qiandi does not belong to my Chen kingdom, it is closely related to Jiangnan. The affairs of Qiandi cannot be ignored." I know Emperor Chen frowned and said, "The spies I sent to Qiandi were all elite spies. Even they disappeared one by one. Who else can I send?" After Emperor Chen finished speaking, the palace fell into a long silence. The situation in Qiandi was special. It was not like the grassland or the western regions, where troops could be sent directly to suppress it. Moreover, it was not easy to send troops directly before figuring out what happened in Qiandi. Now that the grasslands have just been pacified, and the western regions are not stable, the state of Chen cannot be distracted to send troops to Guizhou. However, it is obviously not that easy to find out what happened in Guizhou. The people of the Secret Service are all elites selected from the Imperial Guards, and the ones sent by your Majesty are the elite of the elite. If they can't complete this task, who else can? Your Majesty, I am willing to go to Gizhu. There was silence in the hall for a moment, and suddenly a voice sounded. Tang Ning took 2 steps forward, and when everyone was surprised, he spoke again, if there is a change in Kandy, it will immediately endanger Jiangnan. I am willing to go to Kandy to investigate. Please grant your permission. Not appropriate. Before Emperor Chen spoke, Wang Xiang waved his hand and said firmly, Lord Tang is the right Prime Minister. How can you take such a risk? Lord Tang must not do that. Qianshuo, the Minister of Revenue, spoke up immediately, saying, if Lord Tang has any mishaps, it will be a loss for the entire court and the entire Chen state. After Wang Xiang and the Minister of Revenue spoke, the ministers in the hall responded one after another. Emperor Chen looked at him and said, my dear ministers, what you said makes sense. As the right Prime Minister, you have a heavy responsibility and cannot take risks. There is no need to mention this matter again. Hearing this, Tang Ning retreated silently again. He had originally planned that if there was no news about Sumei, he would go to Kandy to find her in person after spending the new year with them. The reason why he stood up at this moment was because he knew that the matter in Kandy was caused by them. How could he feel at ease if Emperor Chen sent someone else to go there himself? Tang Ning was not worried when his self-recommendation was rejected, because he knew that Emperor Chen would find him sooner or later. The matter in Kandy was not discussed after all, and Emperor Chen could only order everyone to withdraw first. After the last person left the hall, he rubbed his eyebrows and showed a tangled look on his face. After the first spy sent to Kandy disappeared, he sent the elite among the spies the second time, and even sent a top spy the third time. However, their results were the same, which led to him having no one to send. Even the top spy was stuck in Kandy. Could he still count on the officials in the court? Of course, there was one exception. Over the years, except for escorting the princess to marry the Chu state, Tang Ning had done everything very well, which saved him a lot of worries. He didn't want to go into detail about the marriage, nor did he want to care about it. With such a minister who could make him rest assured, nothing was unforgivable. Of the candidates to go to Gizhu for investigation, his favorite was naturally Tang Ning, and he was the one he trusted the most. But Tang Ning was already the right Prime Minister of the dynasty today. How could he, the emperor, save face by letting the Prime Minister of a country take risks and do the job of a secret agent? But if Tang Ning didn't go, who else could he choose? Jiangnan was the granary of the Chen kingdom. He didn't want Jiangnan to be in chaos again. The Chen kingdom had finally settled down, and he would never tolerate any more mistakes in the country. He paced in the hall, his face changing constantly. After a long time, he gritted his teeth and finally made a decision. After Tang Ning left the imperial study, he did not return to the Shangshu province, but stood in front of the square in front of the imperial study. There was a bridge in front of the square, where Zhao Yuan and several little girls were playing. Maybe it was because Grand Secretary Zhang was very strict with him, Zhao Yuan had become thinner and thinner these days. Although his figure now could not be described as well proportioned, he was not as fat as before. King Huai came from behind and saw him standing there. He stopped and asked, Master Tang, won't you return to Shangshu Yamen? There's no rush. Tang Ning looked forward and asked casually, what do you think of Prince Run, Your Highness? King Huai looked at Zhao Yuan and said, Yuaner is talented, willing to endure hardship, and has a filial heart. These are all very rare. He looked at Zhao Yuan on the bridge and said, when we were children, we didn't like to listen to the lectures of the bachelor, and we especially hated arithmetic. Yuaner studied for several hours every day, and played with abacus. She was much better than I was back then. As soon as King Huai finished speaking, Zhao Yuan placed his abacus on the ground on the stone bridge, stepped on it, and slid down the slope of the bridge. King Huai looked at the scene blankly, coughed slightly, and looked a little unnatural. He looked away from the front and said, "It's rare to be able to always maintain a childlike innocence. It is good to always maintain a childlike innocence, but these things are not needed by the emperor." Although Tang Ning has been paving the way for Zhao Yuan, if you put aside your personal emotions and look at it rationally, Zhao Yuan is not suitable for that supreme position. He wanted to be emperor just because he wanted to marry his sister from the Zhang family, Wang family, and Bai family. His motives were not pure. When doing something, motivation is very important. If even the motivation is wrong, how can you ensure that he can do it well? In Tang Ning's opinion, the most suitable person for this position is King Huai. Of course, being suitable does not necessarily mean that Tang Ning supports him. Zhao Yuan's path has been paved by people like them, and no one can stop him. King Huai stopped continuing the topic, glanced at him, and asked, "What are Master Tang waiting for?" Tang Ning didn't answer. She turned around and saw Wei Jian walking from behind. Wei Jian walked up to him, smiled and said, "Master Tang, Your Majesty has summoned. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 830. Tang Ning and Wei Jian returned to the imperial study together and bowed, saying, "Your Majesty, I am here to see you. What is the important matter that you have summoned me for?" Emperor Chen had just rejected Tang Ning's proposal. If he ordered him to investigate Ingizhu at this moment, it would be a bit of a slap in his own face. He still had to bring up this matter himself. He coughed lightly, looked at Tang Ning, and asked, "The stability of Kandy is closely related to that of Jiangnan. In your opinion, how should the court deal with the affairs of Kandy?" Tang Ning said, "I think that although Jiangnan is important, we cannot act rashly. We should send people to Kandy to investigate clearly before making plans." Emperor Chen looked at him and said in a gentle and persuasive way, "None of the spies I sent to Kandy came back. Who do you think is the right person for me to send next?" "I would first recommend His Royal Highness Prince Huai," Tang Ning said. "His Royal Highness Prince Huai is intelligent and wise, and he is very smart. He will definitely be able to complete this task and live up to His Majesty's trust." Prince Huai, Emperor Chen shook his head and said, "Prince Huai does have his own unique insights on political affairs, but these things are not his forte." Tang Ning sighed, "Then I don't know." Emperor Chen looked at him and said, "Didn't you just recommend yourself?" "I thought about it and felt that what you said was right," Tang Ning said. "As the Prime Minister, I should focus on political affairs and national affairs. How can a Prime Minister be a spy? I asked you to go, so you go. Why are you talking so much nonsense?" Seeing that Tang Ning was unmoved, Emperor Chen finally tore off his mask and didn't care about his face at all. He waved his hand and said, "I will give you half a month to prepare. After the new year, you will go to Gizhu to investigate thoroughly." Tang Ning knew that Emperor Chen would be like this. If soft tactics didn't work, he would use hard tactics. He clearly wanted him to go, but he insisted that he ask for it himself to save his face as an emperor. He just liked to see the emperor lose face. Even the emperor who was high above him had shameless moments. "Your Majesty has ordered me to do this, I dare not disobey." Tang Ning thought for a moment and said, "But as the Prime Minister, I must have a reason to leave the capital at will." Emperor Chen waved his hand and said, "I don't care, you can think of the reason yourself." Tang Ning thought for a moment, looked at him, and said, "Your Majesty, I just thought of a reason." Now he is different from before. When the Prime Minister leaves the capital, there are so many eyes watching. Who knows if there are remnants of Liang in the capital? Naturally, he can't go to Gizhu with a big fanfare to let them be on guard. Tang Ning's suggestion to Emperor Chen is to give him a few months off after the beginning of the year and let him travel with his family for a while. He will take his wife all the way to the northeast, and when he leaves the capital, Tang Ning will go back and turn to the southwest. Although this will take more time, it can conceal people's eyes. This proposal was quickly passed by Emperor Chen. For Tang Ning, this is a way to kill two birds with one stone and get the best of both worlds. He didn't know how to convince Xiaoai. In this case, he was going to Guizhou and would not be in the capital. They would lose their original meaning in the capital. It would be better to go all the way to the northeast, just in time to accept Li Tianlan's invitation. When Tang Ning came back from Guizhou to bring Su Mei back and solved the last few chores in the capital, he could go to Chu to meet them. This plan was perfect. Tang Mansion. Zhongai was surprised when she heard his words, "Isn't my husband already the Prime Minister? Why did His Majesty send you to do such a dangerous thing?" Tang Ning shook her head and said, "I also told His Majesty, but His Majesty said that only I can complete this task. It is difficult to disobey the king's order. Then you can't let my husband do everything." Zhonggai's thinking was still traditional. She knew that the king's order could not be disobeyed. After a while of loss, she looked up and asked, "When will my husband leave?" "Wait until after this year." Tang Ning looked at her and said, "But by then, I still need your cooperation." After a while, Zhonyi looked at him and asked, "Does your husband want us to go to Chu?" Tang Ning hugged her and said, "When I bring her back from Guizhou and deal with the affairs of the capital, I will go to Chu to find you." Zhonyi thought for a while and asked, "Will His Majesty let you go at that time?" Tang Ning said, "You don't have to worry about this. Your husband has a good plan." Zhonyi thought for a while and nodded and said, "Okay then." The reason why she refused to go to Chu a few days ago was because she didn't want to be separated from Tang Ning, but now he is going to Guizhou, and he will be gone for several months. There is no difference between them being in the capital and in Chu. The most difficult one to deal with is the eldest lady. Xiru has always listened to Tang Ning, but when Tang Yaoyao came, Tang Ning still encountered some troubles. Tang Yaoyao did not ask Tang Ning why he went to Guizhou, but simply said, "I will go with you." Although Tang Ning went to Guizhou this time, just like the last time he went to Jiangnan, both were to carry out secret missions, but the actual situation was completely different. Jiangnan is a land of fish and rice, with beautiful scenery and pleasant climate. He was on a business trip and a leisure trip, so it was okay to bring Tang Yaoyao with him. Guizhou was different. The landforms of Guizhou were mostly plateaus and mountains. It was known as 8 mountains, 1 water, and 1 field. Mountains and hills occupied more than 90% of the area. Although the scenery of Guizhou must be unique under such a landform, the dangers it contained were also endless. Jiangnan is at least the territory of the state of Chen. With a token, Tang Ning can mobilize the garrison of a state. Qiandi is someone else's territory. Tang Ning's own safety cannot be guaranteed, so how can he protect her? He would naturally not let Tang Yaoyao take this risk. He looked at Tang Yaoyao and said, "You can't go with me, because I have something else to ask you." Tang Yaoyao asked, "What is it?" Tang Ning said, "It's a long way to go to the state of Chu. Xiru and Xiao I don't know martial arts. I feel relieved when you are by my side." Tang Yaoyao looked embarrassed and said, "But..." Tang Ning hugged her and said, "Be good." Tang Yaoyao was immediately deflated and said, "Okay." After persuading the two of them, Tang Ning had no worries, but as he said, Jiangnan was still the territory of the state of Chen after all, and Qiandi was completely a foreign country. Once he entered Qiandi, he would have no backup, which was also a very dangerous thing for him. It is impossible to enter Qiandi with a big fanfare, with hundreds or thousands of people. Tang Ning can only bring 2 or 3 people at most when he enters the mountain this time. One of them is to contact Chen Guo, and this person must be Chen Zhou. The other person will naturally take on the responsibility of guarding. Tang Ning's current strength is more than enough to protect himself in most cases, but in Kandy, where he is unfamiliar with the place and everyone is a master of Gudeo, it is a bit insufficient. Lao Zheng is Tang Ning's ace guard. Many times, he can only escape danger with him by his side. Tang Ning naturally thinks of him first. There are many masters in the Wangu section. Each of the 10 elders is a martial arts master and is proficient in Gushu. I can still deal with one or two of them, but if they come together, I can't beat them. After listening to his words, Lao Zheng shook his head and said, if you go to Kandy, I may not be able to protect you. Lao Zheng has always been targeted and said one thing and two things. If he says he can't beat you, he will definitely not beat you. It seems that the danger in Kandy is beyond Tang Ning's expectations. He looked at the old beggar, who shook his head without hesitation and said, that place is poor and bad, with many insects, so I won't go there. Tang Ning asked, just tell me if you can beat the 10 elders. The old beggar shook his head and said, no. Tang Ning looked at him and asked, so, decades ago, you defeated the 10 elders of the Wangu sect, stripped them naked and tied them to trees, and defiled the 5 female elders, weren't you? Slander, the old beggar was furious and said angrily, am I that kind of person? I left a belly band for those 5 women, and I didn't take advantage of them. Who is slandering me? Rong Xiaorong said. Thanks to the book Friends Jiangbakeng discharge and show Miu than a deep for the reward of 10,000. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiaorong. Chapter 831. Tang Ning looked at the old beggar in shock and asked, did you really do this? Although he had been prepared in his heart, the old beggar's personal admission still refreshed his understanding of him. Tang Ning thought he knew the old beggar's bottom line when he beat them up and tied him to a tree. Tang Ning thought he knew the old beggar's bottom line, but he didn't expect that he would prove with facts that he had no bottom line at all. The old beggar said, it's true that I defeated them, and it's true that I tied them to a tree, but to say that I defiled those women is pure slander. I have a bottom line as a human being. Whether this is slander or not is another matter for now. The old beggar was 1 against 10, and he was able to defeat them and tie them to a tree. In Guizhou province, when facing the Wangu sect, he alone was better than hundreds or even thousands of guards. Tang Ning looked at the old beggar and said, I heard that the wine in Guizhou is good. The 2 best things in the old beggar's life were fine wine and martial arts. Now he placed all his trust in martial arts on Xiao Xiao, and he still drank wine every day. More than good, a look of reminiscence appeared on the old beggar's face, and he said, when I was young, I traveled all over the world and found that no place in the world can compare with the fine wines in Guizhou, but you don't have to use this to seduce me, no matter how fancy you say it, I won't go to Guizhou. The old beggar brought Xiao Xiao to the Chu Kingdom's tent. Tang Ning didn't go after him yet because of the fact that he was Xiaoxiu's master. In the Tang family, he lived and ate for free, and even abducted his sister. He was also living under someone else's roof. Old Zheng knew not to eat for free and acted as his bodyguard every day to repay the favor. From this point of view, the qualities of the old beggar and old Zheng are very different. Far. The most important thing is that even if he is a young master, he cannot take Tang Ning away without her consent for half a year. Lao Zheng's daughter Nanan ran over, looked at Tang Ning, and said, Brother Tang Ning, tell me a story. Nanan likes to listen to stories, and she has emptied the stories in the maid's stomach, so she often pesters Tang Ning. There are so many stories in Tang Ning's mind, they are different every day, and they would be endless to tell in 10 years. Tang Ning asked her to sit on a small stool, glanced at the old beggar, and said, I will tell you 2 stories today. One is called Mr. Dongguo and the Wolf, and the other is called The Farmer's Woman and the Snake. Once upon a time, there was a wolf being chased by a hunter. Mr. Dongguo saved it, but the wolf retaliated by trying to eat Mr. Dongguo. A long time ago, in a cold winter, a peasant woman found a snake on the roadside. She thought it was frozen, so she put it in her arms. The snake finally woke up under the warmth of the peasant woman's body temperature. After waking up, but the snake bit the peasant woman. After listening to the story, Nanan frowned and said, "Mr. taught us that we should repay kindness. Mr. Dongguo saved the wolf, but the wolf wanted to eat it. The peasant woman saved the snake, but the snake wanted to bite her. They didn't care at all. I don't know how to repay a favor." Tang Ning looked at her and said, "It's not just animals, there are also some people who don't know how to repay kindness. They eat, drink and live in other people's homes for free without thinking of repaying. I should keep my eyes open in the future and stay away from those people." The old beggar lay lazily on the chair and said, "I am such a person who doesn't know how to repay kindness. What can you do to me? If a tree doesn't need its bark, it will surely die. If a person doesn't need its skin, it will be invincible." The old beggar had already admitted that he was shameless, and there was nothing Tang Ning could do. He glanced at the old beggar and said, "Then I will tell this story to Xiao Xiao." "Wait a minute," the old beggar suddenly sat up from his chair. In the heart of the disciple, the master must always be tall and majestic, without any flaws. If his precious disciple knows that her master is a person who eats and drinks, has no face, no skin, and does not repay his kindness, he will be in her heart the tall and majestic image will suddenly collapse. He looked at Tang Ning with a stern face and said, "This is just this once. After this, our grudges will be wiped out, and I will never owe you anything again." Tang Ning said, "Deal." This was a deal between him and the old beggar. Tang Ning didn't want to talk about sentiments with this peerless master. From the beginning, he and the old beggar used each other to get what they needed. Tang Ning needed him to control the house, and he needed Tang Ning to provide him with fine wine, and a gifted apprentice. After taking Su Mei back, Tang Ning no longer has to take such risks or make deals with him. After settling the security issue, Tang Ning went to Zhou Xiaoyi to find Chen Zhou. After Chen Zhou listened to what he had to say, he bowed and said, "All my subordinates are at the mercy of the general." The reason why Chen Zhou was picked over others was that, firstly, Tang Ning was used to having him around and could not find anyone smarter and more sensible than him. Secondly, the good news would not go to outsiders. This trip to Guizhou would be a great success if it was done well. One thing is that Chen Zhou's position as general was not earned through military exploits and was not stable. With the contributions of Guizhou province, he could sit in this position safely. After all these arrangements are made, we are just waiting to set off after the new year. Tang Ning came back from the Zioki camp and saw rich man Tang sitting in the courtyard. Seeing him walk in, she said, "Come and sit." After Tang Ning sat down, he glanced at Tang Ning and asked, "Have you sold out many shops in Beijing?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "We will be leaving the capital soon. By then, those shops won't be able to stay for long. Doing business in the capital is different from doing business in Lingzhou. Without a deep background, those shops that can make huge profits will be eaten up by others sooner or later. More importantly, Tang Ning is surrounded by enemies in the capital. He has offended almost all the powerful people. I am afraid that the Tang family's shops will be attacked by them as soon as he escapes." Two prodigal sons, Mr. Tang glared at him and said, "This is a shame for a businessman." Father-in-law was obviously very dissatisfied with his and Tang Yaoyao's profligacy. Tang Ning could only say, "I will think of a way." With Tang Ning's current status, if he wants to leave Chen state normally, I am sure that the Emperor Chen will not agree. It is a good idea to escape by faking death, but Tang Ning believes that if this news is released, many powerful people in the capital will hold a banquet at home to celebrate for 3 days. At that time, those shops will inevitably be blocked by them. In order to ensure that the shops are not affected, they need to find a backer for them. Tang Ning has many enemies and friends in the capital, but it is not easy to find someone suitable to take over these shops. A big family like the Fang family will not directly interfere in the affairs of merchants, but without the strength and background of the Fang family, it will not be able to suppress the powerful and wealthy who are ready to move. Tang Ning also thought about handing these shops over to Xiao Ju to manage, but the Xiao family is already powerful and wealthy. Although these things can bring them great benefits, they can also make them a thorn in the eyes of other powerful and wealthy people. The Xiao family has finally risen again, and Tang Ning can't let them go deeper into danger. It would be best to find someone who is not offended by the powerful and wealthy in the capital, who likes money and is reliable. A concave and convex figure immediately appeared in Tang Ning's mind. In the princess's mansion, Princess Anyang looked at Tang Ning and asked, "Why are you looking for me?"